Do you ever find yourself missing that crappy job that you had in high school even though you know it was objectively bad? Nostalgia is a crazy drug that'll make anything viewed through the rose-tinted glasses of the past seem better than it was. I think that nostalgia fuels a lot of frustration with modern gaming and leads people to saying stuff like, "Oh, why can't this game be good like its predecessor that came out 10 years ago?" That's a bias, sure, but what if gaming actually was better in the past? I did a bit of digging into this, and I want to argue that nostalgia aside, gaming did peak, specifically in the year 2007. Let's take a little trip to see what gaming was like back then. A lot of iconic titles came out in 2007, including The Witcher, Call of Duty 4 Modern Warfare, Mario Galaxy, Mass Effect, Halo 3, BioShock, and Portal. Backing a lot of excellent releases of the year were numerous games that had come out recently, such as Oblivion, a lot of great Sims 2 expansion packs, God of War, and Legend of Zelda Twilight Princess, along with the release of the Wii itself in 2006. What makes 2007 stand out in the history of gaming is only partly to do with the titles that were being played then. Back in 2007, it seemed like there was an ethos of game design that made that moment truly special. You see hints and glimmers of this ethos in the 2020s, but it's increasingly rare. I'm sure that game devs go through whole classes that talk about the theory of good game design and all that. I'm a tech and media researcher, not a game dev. What I can talk about instead is the basic elements of game design from the viewpoint of an everyday gamer, which is a perspective that I feel like has gotten so lost in the gaming discourse of the last 20 years or so. Anytime I play a game and either immediately fall in love with it or walk away feeling confused, empty, or straight up bored, I tend to think about that game's strengths or weaknesses in terms of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, whether that game came out in 2007 or 2025. For anyone who isn't familiar, this is the concept in psychology that argues that humans have certain needs that need to be fulfilled first in order for other needs to then be truly fulfilled. For example, a human needs to be sheltered and fed before they can fully benefit from love and belonging, and likewise they need belonging before they can have good self-esteem. In the context of gaming, I tend to think about this hierarchy like this. At the very bottom is the basic playability of the game. This means a couple different things. The most obvious one is that the game needs to be glitch-free enough so that you can literally just play it. You would think that this would just be a given, but so many games are released before they're actually playable. Another critical aspect of this is that the graphics and UI have to be at least okay. The graphics need to be reasonably good but not amazing, I'll get to that in just a second, and the UI doesn't need to be flawless, it just needs to work. I know a lot of you gaming nerds are gonna get mad at me for not prioritizing UI more here, but let's be real. Most people and most gamers wouldn't know good versus bad UI if you hit them upside the head with it. The next need is at least one of the following, and ideally at least two or more. You need an immersive setting, or an engaging story, or some kind of story building activity inherent to the game. What I mean by this is that first-person shooters often have stories or campaigns, but they kind of suck a lot of the time and aren't the main point of the game. Instead of a good story then, you need an immersive setting. Maybe it's a really cool battlefield, or a unique planet, or an interesting space setting, it doesn't really matter. The player just needs to feel as if they've been dropped somewhere captivating that fosters a lot of activity. On the other hand, some games aren't necessarily built with a strict story in mind, and instead the player is supposed to create their own story alongside playing the game. Sandbox games are the best example of this. Sometimes they come with a story, sometimes they don't. Regardless, the player has a lot of control over the general arc of the game. This is what I mean by a story building activity. If you don't provide the player with a story, then you need to give them the tools to make one. Truly great games often have two, if not all three of these qualities. To use somewhat newer games as examples, I would argue that Stardew Valley and Red Dead Redemption 2, two very different but equally goated games, have all three qualities. The third need is making sure before launch that you can release speedy patches that actually fix stuff. It's also all the more important depending on how buggy the game was on release. You might have an otherwise amazing game that struggles because maybe it's free of game-killing bugs such that it technically functions, but maybe there are enough bugs that make it a drag to play because you have to keep restarting it. Any friction like that, and gamers start to lose interest in the game, oftentimes permanently. We've all played games where annoying bugs stay around months after the release of the game, and it just seems like game devs don't bother to prioritize patch production when developing the game. The need I have in fourth place here is probably going to be controversial to some because it's become such a mainstay in modern gaming, but that's kind of the point of this video essay. At this stage in the hierarchy of gaming needs, you need to have good, not just passable, graphics and artwork. This can mean more technical things like advanced lighting, textures, and fine-tuned physics and facial expressions. This can also be better creative decisions with things like the overall art style, architecture, detailed scenic landscapes, clothing and armor design, and so on. The bigger budget for the game, the more freedom and capability here, but that's also kind of a trap, and a huge reason why newer games struggle so much, and why 2007 had so much success. The leaps and bounds in processing and graphics technology in the last 20 years or so have enabled game developers, especially AAA gaming companies, to create visually stunning games. The sci-fi and fantasy RPG category showcases this best. With each year, RPGs try to strive closer to visual perfection, despite the fact that perfection is an inherently impossible goal. This trend has had some really bad unintended consequences for gaming. First of all, it pushes platforms and PCs to the breaking point, as the software and hardware demands of these games skyrocket. Gamers constantly feel pressure to upgrade their platforms as a result, which is expensive and alienating. On top of that, the focus on computational or graphical intensity has come at a massive cost to other aspects of the game. This is stuff like making sure it actually works, building out its story, questlines, and character arcs, and making sure that you can actually patch the game. As you know by now, these are all things that, in my opinion, need to come first before you can deploy those shiny, high-intensity graphics. Because these kinds of technological accomplishments just couldn't happen in 2007, game developers' focus was more balanced back then. It's not to say that graphics weren't important back then. They were, but developers had to make do with the tech of the time, and I would argue that that spurred a lot of creativity that you just don't see a lot of today. This isn't a new issue, by the way, and it's not exclusive to gaming. An increase in technological capabilities doesn't mean that something always gets better, and constraints can actually lead to novel thinking and ideas. To look at an example outside of gaming, I would turn to DeepSeek's chatbot versus the computationally intense chatbots designed by OpenAI, Microsoft, and so on. Restrictions placed on DeepSeek's ability to get more compute led to its engineers thinking more creatively and critically about generative model design, and eventually they released a chatbot that competes with ChatGPT. I know there has been more criticism of DeepSeek in the last few months, which is a whole can of worms that I'm not going to touch here. The basic trade-off between technological capability versus creativity still applies though, and that's the point. Another example of this is black and white photography. There are whole styles and genres of photography that just don't exist now, despite the fact that, hypothetically, photography gets better every year. Think of the breathtaking natural photography by Ansel Adams, or the glamorous shots of Hollywood by George Hurrell. Sure, you can try to recreate these kinds of photos using Lightroom and Photoshop, but you'll never really get there. The fact is that old school film cameras, like the 8x10s that produce these shots, are just fundamentally different from the digital machines that we have today. Color and digital photography are cool and all, yet I have to ask, did we lose something along the way? Going back to the graphics of gaming, I can't help but wonder if game developers wouldn't be better served by trying to do more with less, technologically speaking, instead of the more mindset that dominates gaming today. It's hard to ignore that one big motivation for this emphasis on graphics is that the economy we live in today is a highly visual economy, with visual social media serving as the backbone of gaming marketing and hype. This is to some extent a two-way street, with game developers releasing a visually compelling but otherwise broken game to be pushed on social media, and then content creators reward them by using that beautiful broken game to create content. I also think that in the war for your attention span alongside social media and everything else, the visually striking game is the one that wins. Back in 2007, social media barely existed, and it certainly wasn't anything like how it is today. When it comes to video game graphics, perhaps there's a lesson here to be learned from 2007. I actually see evidence of some developers trying to get there. Popular pixel art games like Celeste, Terraria, Stardew Valley, and Animal Well are all truly gorgeous, but noticeably prioritize a retro look over trying to be the biggest, shiniest thing out there. Not every game should be designed using pixel art, of course. I just think that we should use graphic strategies other than more. I'm also not saying that technological advancements should play no role in game design or graphics. Another video essay of mine talks about the limitations of the creation engine that Bethesda uses, and how continued use of an engine whose core technology dates back to the 1990s isn't doing that company any favors. All that I'm advocating for is a more balanced approach to improve graphics in contrast to other aspects of the game. To finish out my hierarchy of needs, there is one final level to discuss, and like graphics, it tends to be over-prioritized by modern gaming companies. DLC, expansions, substantive updates, and other extras like this. I think that even calling this a need is kind of a misnomer, because a truly good game shouldn't need DLC. The vanilla version of the game should be good enough on its own, period. DLC is nice to have if it's well made. It can increase the longevity of the game, but it should never be necessary. If it is, that sounds like you've just made a mid-game, or worse, you've intentionally made a game that is missing critical components that you can later sell as DLC. Unfortunately, gaming companies increasingly view DLC and expansions as a cash cow, and therefore they are priority number one. If I had $1 for every time a AAA game had paid DLC before it had patches that fixed long-standing bugs, I would have many dollars. Like graphics, tech development is also a cause of this problem. In 2007, physical discs were still largely the preferred medium for gaming. Digital downloads were hard to pull off because of low internet speeds, and not everybody had Wi-Fi back then. Now you can't survive as a gamer without Wi-Fi, and digital downloads, including poorly designed money grab DLC, are easier to sell than ever. The way the hierarchy of needs works is that you need to have the basic things before you can meaningfully have the more advanced things. In 2007, it seems like this was largely understood and adhered to. Nowadays, it feels like gaming companies are prioritizing game design in this way, instead of the way that everyday gamers want it to be. There are many reasons for this, such as the rise of social media, the growth-based profit obsession of modern gaming, and advancements in tech. As I've said before, it seems like everyday gamers' basic consumer desires haven't been central to the game design process for a while now. Until we get corrections here, I think we're going to continue to suffer from a frustrating gaming landscape. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to like and subscribe.